Good afternoon, everyone. For those who I have not met yet, my name is Mallory Rush, and I'm the Executive Director at Empower Missouri. Thanks for being with us today for our last Friday forum of the spring. We traditionally end these calls in May with a recap of our legislative session. And so that is what we are doing here today, and we are so glad that you have joined us. I will just briefly talk us through our agenda for the next hour. We are doing our welcome right now. We'll do a little bit of networking after. And we then will run through a wrap up of each of our coalition areas. So, starting with food security, then affordable housing, and then community justice. We'll talk about a few other issues that we worked on during session and just kind of how session wrapped up as a whole. And then we'll tell you a few other ways you can hang out with Empower Missouri this summer. So yeah, from here, we're just going to jump right into our updates, both kind of on what happened over the last 5 months in session, but also each of the policy managers is going to give you a little bit of a preview of what lies ahead on some of our key issues in each area. So with that, I will turn it over to Christine Woody, our food security policy manager.
Great. Thanks so much, Mallory. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I will just jump right in. So I think our legislative session in the last few months have really been a mixed bag regarding food security, but overall, I've been very pleased with some positive outcomes on quite a few things we've been working on. I think the biggest announcement and most exciting thing to talk about is the summer EBT program, or what is now known as Missouri Sun Bucks. So summer nutrition is where they kind of came up with that acronym. So this is an issue that we have been working on for a while as advocates. In Congress on the federal level made this program permanent in the spring of 2023, and it was to begin in states in the summer of 2024. That only was allowed to happen in states if states decided to opt into it and pay for 50% of the administration costs. Missouri did decide to do that, which that first off is number one excitement, is just them deciding to do it. The second challenge with that was actually getting the 50% of the administration costs to get passed in the budget. So number one, I want to thank everyone for all of their advocacy on this. We had a large presence in terms of advocates reaching out to the department, reaching out to the governor, reaching out to the legislators about the importance of this program. And I'm happy to report that money was included in the supplemental budget for 2024, and that has been officially signed by the governor, meaning that we can move forward this summer. It also has been included in the fiscal year 2024-25 budget, which has not been signed by the governor, but I don't see any reason that it shouldn't be. So that will help us fund the summer of 2025. I put in the chat the link to the website that the Department of Social Services has put together about this program. They are still currently on hold because they need to get final approval from the federal level to actually implement the program. That approval could not have happened until the money was actually signed in the budget. And since that just happened a week or two ago, they're in that final process of getting federal approval. But they started putting out information. They've already branded it. They have a logo. They have information. So they are taking those first initial steps to actually move forward on it for this summer. This website gives you some good basic information about what the program is, what the program would do, who the program will help. But yet again, it's not officially a go until we kind of get some final papers signed and some go ahead from the federal level. But this was a really exciting update and a really exciting progress for the state. Over 400,000 kids are going to benefit from this program, and we are grateful for all of your work. There is some information on that website that you can share with families and with clients, so feel free to look through that. And if you have families and children that you all are working with that could benefit from this, please share with them the initial information about it. All right. The next kind of big, exciting announcement that isn't necessarily related to the policy goals that we had for this legislative session is that Empower Missouri, along with some other individual clients, we're part of a lawsuit against our Department of Social Services, with Legal Services of Eastern Missouri being our attorneys on that. We had filed suit against the Department of Social Services because of their the challenges that folks were having in getting access to the program, being denied interviews, not being able to access interviews, and then thus not being able to access the SNAP or slash food stamps program. This has been a long, ongoing challenge for our Department of Social Services. And after many years of trying to advocate for some changes that never happened, filing a lawsuit was the next step to remedy that. We filed suit in February of 2022. The judge finally issued a decision on that case just a few weeks ago, and their decision was that we won on every count that we filed suit against. So that is an exciting step. I think the most exciting thing about his decision on that is that, yes, of course, this is not going to be an overnight change. Like, it's not just going to go poof, everything's fine with the department. But in his decision, the way that he has made the plans moving forward is that our attorneys, thus us and our other clients, are to present the Department of Social Services a list of steps and a list of things that we think the department could do and needs to do to make access to the SNAP program better. That report is due within the next 15 or 20 days. And then the state has 30 days to respond to our requests. And then after that back and forth, a plan will be put in place and monitored by the judge to ensure some plans of action actually take place and are implemented. So it's going to be a two-way street, open dialogue to hopefully, in the end, make some real systemic changes to make access to the SNAP program better for the state of Missouri and the clients. This was an amazing judgment, and we have a really ripe opportunity to make some real changes in the department and how they run their SNAP program. So as those reports kind of get filed back and forth in the courts, we'll kind of keep everyone updated, but just winning is great, but there's a lot of work to be had in the future on that. All right. And then on top of that, of course, we had quite a few policy priorities that we were working on and advocating on within the legislature these last 5 months. So I'm just going to run through the rest of these really quickly to give you kind of a general sense of what happened or did not happen on some of our issues. So the first one is currently in the state of Missouri, if you have a drug felony on your record, there's a lifetime ban on accessing the SNAP program. There is some modifications that allows for some folks to have access to the SNAP program, but it is still very challenging to access. So if you have a drug-related felony on your record, there is a good chance that you will never be able to access the SNAP program. That can be taken out of our laws. There is an option on the federal level that states that that says that states can decide to opt out of that. Missouri has been working on trying to opt out of that lifetime ban for many, many years. And this year we got closer than we have ever gotten before. Sadly, it did not get to the finish line, but we had really strong sponsors of that bill in both the Senate and the House. The bills moved through those chambers. It got through the committees. It got voted on the floor. Senator Tony Luetkemeyer is a state senator who had some issue with the language, and he had a lot of power in terms of what criminal justice focused, which this is criminal justice focused because it's a drug felony connected benefit, did not allow it to move through the final bill that was passed. So I think that gives us a plan for what we need to do for 2025. We need to meet with Senator Tony Luetkemeyer and try to convince him to let this go. So we are going to regroup on that and set a plan for this summer and then for next spring in 2025. So if you all are interested in that or have a connection to Senator Tony Luetkemeyer, please reach out to me and we will connect you to our work group on this and work on it in 2025. But on a side note for this, like I said, this is a federal level provision. The Farm Bill is a large piece of legislation that really regulates the entire SNAP program on the federal level. And there's a lot of conversation in the upcoming Farm Bill, which is hopefully going to be passed this year, where this will be discussed and implemented, where this ban cannot happen at all. So if we can't get it done on the state level next year, I am cautiously optimistic that it will happen on the federal level, thus Missouri not being able to do it anymore. So in one way or the other, I believe that this lifetime ban will end in the next year or so. We did some discussions about fresh food access, allowing folks to have better access to fresh fruits and vegetables. One way to do that is through what's called the Double Up Food Bucks program. This is additionally a matching federal state program that provides extra funds for folks to purchase fresh fruits and vegetables. Up until this point, the way that the state has come up with their money has been through private foundations. No state money has been put up for this match. But that only goes so far. So not through any advocacy really of us, through the advocacy of the organization that really runs this program for Missouri, was able to get into this year's budget $2 million to be that state match for this program, which is a lot of money. It's going to be very helpful to shore up this program and hopefully be able to expand it to more sites in Missouri. So we're waiting on for more details about how it's actually going to play out. But that additional $2 million that's going to be coming from state funds is going to really help fresh fruit access in the coming years. We did work on the restaurant meals program, which is a specific program that is for seniors or those who have a disability or those who are homeless who are also on the SNAP program. This would allow certain restaurants to be able to accept SNAP cards for hot prepared meals. We've been working on this bill for a couple years. It did not get much traction this year. It got a hearing in one of the chambers, but didn't move much further than that. But I think this was kind of a jumping off point for us to understand and realize that seniors and food insecurity is a bigger problem, something that we really need to address and look at more closely. Seniors, even if you're on the SNAP program, is a very small amount that many seniors receive, but there's a lot of seniors that aren't on it at all that could qualify. And I think looking into that deeper is something that Empower Missouri is committed to doing. And this advocacy around restaurant meals is just going to be one piece of that. So that piece did not pass. But starting this summer, we are going to be really working on seniors and food insecurity. We're going to be developing a really strong steering committee that's going to look at that. We're going to develop some messaging around it, and we're hopeful to have some town halls and community meetings to really discuss the issue of seniors and food insecurity, and then work on some advocacy around some policy change that addresses that population specifically, including restaurant meals. The other thing on there that's labeled as ESAP is Elderly Simplified Application Project. That can all be done on the administrative level. It does not need to be done legislatively, but it is a really strong potential for advocacy to really address food insecurity in the senior population. So stay tuned for a lot more work on seniors and food insecurity in the next few months. And if you or your organization specifically is working on that, please do reach out to me. I'd love to include you on that work specifically. The last ones I'll kind of run through a little bit more quickly. We had a bill in the Senate that would create a state fund that would cover the cost of the reduced priced school meals. So the federally funded school meal program, the way that it's set up is that there's a free school meal category for families who are at 130% of poverty and below. And there's a reduced price meal category for families at 185% of poverty and below. That 130 to 185% of poverty is still not a lot of money and is still a challenge for families to afford. And that reduced price is still a challenge. Quite a few states have seen that that's a challenge and have come up with some state funds to make that reduced price category also free for those families. stating that if you're at 185% of poverty or below, you can get a free school meal. That is what the bill that we had filed in the Senate would have done. It would have created that state fund to get rid of the reduced price school meals. And we're going to continue to work on that in the next year. We're going to develop a work group, try to include some of the kind of school-based groups, school nutrition associations, school counselors, school administrators, in that conversation more than we have in the past. And we need to work on a House sponsor. We have a Senate sponsor who's willing to do it, but we need to find a House sponsor. And we have a few that are willing to have that conversation. So that's what's going to happen this summer. Another issue that we've been working on that did not pass, but does is going to require a lot more conversation and a lot more work, and that's what we're going to focus on in the next couple of years. The state of Missouri is one of just a handful of states that allows sales tax of groceries. They not only allow a state sales tax of groceries, they allow localities to also tax groceries. So in some localities, if you include the state sales tax and the local sales tax, it can be upwards of 10% on grocery purchases, when groceries is definitely a vital and necessary thing that all families need to have. We believe that there are other taxes and other forms of making revenue that do not include taxing groceries. We had some bills that filed in the state level that did this. Yet again, it did not move far. There's a lot of opposition, mostly on the municipality side, about how to replace that. Because that tax revenue is necessary for those localities at this point, right? To fund police and fire and other kind of necessary infrastructure. But I think some of the cities and municipalities are open to the discussion of what alternative taxes are out there and available. So we're going to do a lot more research and a lot more discussions about this topic, but we still believe that states and localities should not be taxing groceries. We just need to figure out how to get to that point. And then the last thing that the Food Security Coalition has been doing that's not necessarily legislative focused, we have been doing some conversations with the folks who run our WIC program in the state of Missouri. WIC is also a program that is underutilized. There's a lot of folks who qualify but are not enrolled in that program, and it's such a beneficial program that we want to work with the administrators to figure out how we can boost enrollment and make that program better. And WIC administrators are open to us having that conversation. So we've created a WIC advisory group. The folks from WIC are coming to our coalition, and we're kind of talking back and forth about that. And we are going to continue that conversation and see how we can help them and they can help us. Our next call is in August. So if you are interested in that topic and that issue, please reach out to me, and I'd love to include you in some of those calls. There's a lot of information. So please, questions in the chat or shout them out, or if we're waiting to the end, just let me know, Mallory.
So sorry, didn't realize I was on mute. I was trying to say yes, there is one question in the chat from Jesse. What specific messaging and what specific constituent groups, e.g. churches, schools, were key to getting Missouri Republican lawmakers to back appropriations for the Sunbooks program?
We luckily had the support of the Department of Social Services on this. Like, they were on board of wanting to do this and implement it. So a lot of those conversations with especially the Missouri Republican lawmakers were had by our director of Department of Social Services. He spent a lot of time in the Capitol, going office to office, talking to them about it. So I honestly didn't have to have many of those conversations. I mean, he really worked those halls and met with those people. And he had much more influence than myself or some of our other advocate groups. We're very lucky about that.
I will say too, I'll add to that, that I think that this was, you know, we worked with a team of folks like pretty early in the process to generate a huge sign-on letter that had support really from every corner of the state. And that was a lot of organizations and constituent groups, including churches, including schools, including many nonprofits serving children, many hunger groups from across the state, who were all sort of coming together to say, hey, like this is something that our kids really need. And I will say that our legislature is generally pretty good about wanting to support children and children's issues. And so, because this was a child-specific nutrition program, we didn't face some of the same barriers that we have in other conversations around hunger programs that serve adults. I know in the at the very beginning of session, we were talking with a lot of lawmakers about it, and every one of those conversations was like, yeah, that seems like a thing we should do. What do you need from us? So I think that it does tend to be a little bit easier to advocate for children's hunger than hunger in general.
Yeah, and I think just the money talk also. I mean, we had some really great graphics through the help of the Food Research and Action Center that just showed how much money would be coming into the state with those benefits and being spent like automatically in grocery stores compared to the 50% match of the administrative costs that the state would have to come up with. So what the state would have to come up with for I was like $51 million, I think that's going to come in from the benefits, was also a good message to be sharing.
Yeah, great point.
Christine?
Yes.
Yeah, Bob Pieper. First off, I realize I owe you a phone call. I'm sorry.
Yes.
This has been a very busy week.
You're
Um,
fine.
unless you already have one, I will ask the silver-haired legislature to refer you a representative for your senior meals steering committee, because I happen to know there's interest in that. And then
Great.
regarding the grocery tax, I agree there is going to be huge municipal resistance to that. I would urge you, as somebody with a little experience in this area, to consider not just alternative taxes, but budget cuts that cities or counties or anyone else may have for expenses they may not really need. This will go over really big with Republicans. And if you like, if I can ever, I can send you an email or whatever and give you some suggestions on things that might be well received by the cities.
Yeah, that would all be very helpful, Bob. Thank you.
Right, thanks, Christine. So we are going to move on to affordable housing legislation. My name is B. Sanchez. I'm along with Misha Smith. We're both affordable housing policy managers at Empower Missouri. So let's hop to it. So here's just like a quick overview of the different legislative priorities the Affordable Housing Coalition had for the year. Land banks, circuit breaker tax reform, increasing funding to Missouri's Housing Trust Fund. That is really important to us. Establishing the Missouri Fair Housing Act. All of those were bills that we supported. And then there were some bills that we weren't as happy to see pop up, but they did. The eviction moratoria preemption did come up again this year. There was also new types of bills being introduced this year around source of income discrimination bans and an attempt to preempt protections around that, as well as the homeless criminalization pieces. And if we can go to the next slide, please. So we're going to talk first about the bills that did end up passing this year. The first one is around eviction moratoria preemption. Of course, we were opposed to that. And just so folks know what that is, essentially an eviction moratoria is the type of laws that we saw during COVID, for example, when there was a lot of folks that were at risk of eviction, localities, cities, states, or even the federal government can issue an eviction moratoria to prevent mass eviction. These are typically tools that are not used very frequently, but are extremely helpful and necessary during times of mass kind of disaster situations. Unfortunately, this eviction moratoria preemption or block. It did pass this year. This was the third year that they had introduced this piece of legislation, and it did get passed this year. So what that means for us in Missouri, localities and courts will no longer be able to issue or enforce legislation that stops evictions during these states of emergencies, unless it is authorized by the state law. So the state legislature would have to take action to issue an eviction moratoria in the future if that is something that is needed. And that was Senate Bill, let me grab that. Senate Bill 895 and House Bill 2062. Sorry, go ahead. All right. And so to some happier news, we have been working on land banking legislation for the last couple of years as well. It did pass as an amendment. So we do finally have land bank enabling legislation in Missouri. What that means is that localities, big and small, all across Missouri, are now empowered to establish a land bank. And for folks that aren't super familiar with what land banks are, they are entities that could be set up to take abandoned tax delinquent properties, clean the title, clean any defects that could cause problems for folks that are trying to buy those properties and put them back on the market. When we did research on this issue, we learned that there were over, 370,000 kind of abandoned properties all dotted across our state. And we see that as a huge kind of resource that we could potentially tap into when we talk about future affordable housing. And so we are really pleased that this land bank enabling legislation did get amended onto House Bill 2062. Keep in mind, House Bill 2062 was the eviction moratoria bill. So it was, very, very bittersweet. But we're going to count our wins where we can. And so this was a big one for us as well.
Yeah.
Next.
And real quick, V, hi, I'm Nisha Smith. I'm the other Affordable Housing Policy Manager. And so with the land bank legislation passing, we will be creating an education campaign around this, and also doing more work in our Affordable Housing Coalition work group. So if you would be interested in being a part of that, you can send an email to V or myself, and we can make sure we put our emails in the chat for you guys, because we're pretty excited about what this can do.
Absolutely. I think that there are probably a bunch of folks on this call that can think of, abandoned properties in their neighborhoods or in their cities and towns that they have maybe a vision for turning that into something useful for the community. And so this land bank enabling legislation can really help with that. But we know that not a lot of people know what land banks are. And so we want to continue that work and do some education around that, as Misha mentioned. All right, so moving on to bills that are important to us, but really didn't see a whole lot of action this year, this legislative session. The Missouri Housing Trust Fund, we wanted to increase the funding mechanism to that. The Housing Trust Fund is Missouri's most flexible pot of money that we have available to us to fund future affordable housing, to help with all sorts of housing related issues. Unfortunately, it is very, very underfunded. When we did some research on that, we found that requests from all over the state for things like new affordable housing builds, for fixing up properties, the the requests were 3 times more than what we're actually collecting through recorder fees, which is what it is funded through. And so we really want to see some increases in that to really start addressing our really critical affordable housing shortage. So that was introduced this year, Senate Bill 1184 by Senator Arthur, but it did not, unfortunately, see much action. Some other important legislation to us, including the Missouri Fair Housing Act, with House Bill 2000. That was introduced. Unfortunately, it did not see much action. And then the circuit breaker tax credit. So this piece of legislation is really important to us as well. A lot of folks that are very low income or certain disabled folks are able to apply for a senior tax credit on whatever they may have paid in rent or in property taxes. And this credit really helps some of our most vulnerable neighbors stay housed. Unfortunately, the mechanisms for that, whether that be the income guidelines or the amounts that we push, the benefit amount or the credit amount has not been updated since 2008. That has seen more movement this year, so that is a little bit of good news, but we still have some more work to do on that. And then finally, bills that ended up not seeing and not moving forward and getting passed. Source of income discrimination ban preemption. I know that's a mouthful, but what it means is essentially if this would have passed, our state would have been able to block any type of protections against source of income discrimination. We have several localities that have passed their own kind of local pieces of legislation to protect their communities against this type of discrimination. It got way too close to getting passed this year. And so we expect to see that come up again next year. And we would love to talk to folks that feel passionate about this issue, that believe that, housing choice vouchers are an important resource in our community. And then the other thing that we were able to kind of stop in its tracks was the homeless criminalization legislation with Senate Bill 1336. Thankfully, nothing happened there. Just like a little bit of a recap from a couple of years ago when that bill did pass, it got snuck onto another bill, and we were able to overturn it the following year, I believe. And so now it's just kind of coming back up again and getting reintroduced. So we're opposed to both of those, and both of those stopped, thankfully. And then I believe Misha, do you want to take over here?
Yeah, absolutely. And I am the other affordable housing policy manager. And so even though the legislative session's over, the work isn't over, and we are already preparing for 2025. And as V mentioned, we fully expect that source of income discrimination ban preemptions will definitely be back, because even though the original bill stalled, they were working really hard at the end to try to get them as amendments on other bills. But because of different things, including the 2 record-breaking filibusters, that did not happen. So we will be putting a lot of work over the summer and the fall of building a really strong campaign around that, so we're prepared. Homeless criminalization, we fully expect to come back as well. And one thing with that is the Supreme Court did hear a case on homeless criminalization, and we are expecting them to release the decision on what they're going to do by June. And kind of the belief now is either they're going to send it back to the states and say you guys are allowed to make your own decision, or they may rule that localities can criminalize homelessness, or that they can not criminalize homelessness on its own, but the actions that come from being homeless, like vagrancy laws. So one way or another, we know that we are going to be dealing with this next year. And so we're going to be working very strong on very strong campaigns around that to stop them. And then also really working hard to get more support to pass a bill to increase the funding for the Missouri Housing Trust Fund, which Empower Missouri was part of getting that passed in 1994. And the fee right now is $3, and we're just trying to increase it to $9. And we're getting a lot of pushback from the Missouri Realtors Association. So we're really looking at what kind of campaign we can do to build support. And then also, like I said, a lot of education to communities about the land banks, because this bill passed doesn't mean land banks are automatically instituted. Communities institute their own land bank agency, and we really want to make sure that they have all the information they need as they do this. So we have a lot of work ahead of us. And as I said, you're welcome to join our coalition to learn more. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, Dee and Misha. Yeah, go ahead, Gwen.
Hi, everybody. My name is Gwen Smith Moore. I am the Criminal Justice Policy Manager with Empower. I'm going to try to go pretty quickly through a relatively busy session on community justice issues, but ultimately one that, a lot of the things that we worked on did not make it past the final line. So we're going to talk about Clean Slate, where that got to, local control of policing, an issue that keeps coming back, where a couple other CJC priorities got to, a ballot initiative that is going to be on the ballot this November around funding sheriff and prosecutor salaries through court fees. And then last but not least, a little bit of an overview of what it was included in the one piece of criminal justice legislation that did pass, Omnibus Bill 754. So Clean Slate, we had a really good year. We had multiple bills filed, 2 in both chambers. Our sponsors from last year, Senator Trent and Representative Krista Finelli, brought back their legislation, slightly updated, but very similar to last year. And then we also had Senator Brian Williams, who has been a longtime advocate for expungement policy, and Representative Justin Hicks also filed bills. We had Clean Slate as a focus at multiple organizations' advocacy days. So if you are part of any of those advocacy days, thank you so much for talking to your lawmakers about the importance of automated expungement. And we got hearings in both chambers this year. We had a very diverse group of advocates in both of those hearings offering supportive testimony. Last year, you might remember we only had a hearing in the House, so that was exciting that we had dual chamber hearings. And on the House side, House Bill 2555, this is Representative Hicks' bill, was voted unanimously out of general laws, and then the next committee assignment that it received, which was the Rules Legislative Oversight Committee. And I think the fact that that was a unanimous vote, despite there being some initial pushback during the hearings in those committees, showed that people were really swayed by the testimony that they heard. So we have a busy couple months ahead of us before next session. We will be continuing to have conversations with lawmakers and stakeholders in the expungement process, and those conversations will be very focused on feasibility, implementation, how is this going to happen? Which we have some very good data and very good resources to back up. We will also be in the process of securing new House sponsors, as both Krista Finelli and Hicks are running for higher office. Local control of policing is an issue that continues to come back year after year, and as long as it is as long as there are bills around this, we will be there in Jeff City opposing them. These are bills that seek to remove local control of policing and put the hands of the police budget and police oversight in the state. Empower Missouri did a lot to mobilize opposition to these policies, which would really weaken jurisdictions such as St. Louis City, which is where I myself live, weaken jurisdictions' ability to make their own decisions about public safety, even as St. Louis City has seen decreased crime rates in recent years. House Bill 1481 from Representative Brad Christ made it the furthest out of the multiple bills that were filed. It made it all the way into the Senate, where it had a committee hearing, and then was not voted out of the Senate Fiscal Oversight Committee. Couple other CJC priorities to mention quickly. Geriatric parole pathways is a big focus for us, supporting ways for folks to get out of prison earlier. These bills did not go very far this session. There was one bill, House Bill 1545 from Representative Bill Allen, that had a really positive committee hearing. And so I hope that if Representative Allen is back in office next year, he will bring that bill back. Likewise, with private probation, the bill filed from Representative Riley did not go far, did not receive a hearing. And then on the correctional oversight side of things, although this bill didn't receive a hearing, we are still celebrating because House Bill 2689, filed by Representative Lovasco, is the first ever Republican filed sponsored piece of correctional oversight legislation. So lots of work in all three of those areas for us in future years. As I mentioned, so this, despite a lot of opposition from both Empower and other organizations, this joint resolution was passed, SJR 71. So expect this on the ballot in November. This is going to go to voters to allow the voters of Missouri to decide if they want to allow for the levying of fines and fees on justice-involved individuals to fund sheriff and prosecutor salaries, basically court fees that would be levied on to folks, that already have a number of court fees. Supporters of this bill say that that is going to be capped at $5, but the language is actually very vague. And so, there is no clear indication that it actually would be limited to only $5 of fines. And to be honest, there are already an exorbitant number of court fines and fees. As it is, there's a lot of other funding mechanisms for state official salaries, and we would like to see that pursued instead. So expect throughout the summer and fall some messaging and education from Empower Missouri around this ballot provision. All right, and Senate Bill 754 is an omnibus bill that was passed in the final day of session. Glad that this made it out. It has a lot of similar provisions to last year's Senate Bill 189, which was passed and then ultimately vetoed by the governor. So to try to avoid that veto, the provisions that the governor had originally called out have been removed, and lawmakers, that context of last year's veto was hanging over them all session, and they tried to be very cautious with the language that was included in this. So we are hoping to avoid a veto. Couple of the victories in Senate Bill 754 include banning law enforcement from issuing warrants for traffic infractions. Right now in Missouri, in jails all over the state, there are people sitting there because they were picked up on a warrant on a failure to pay a traffic fine or a failure to show up in court to pay a traffic ticket. If this bill is signed by the governor, that will be no more. It would remove the crack cocaine sentencing disparity from Missouri law going forward. It's not retroactive, but this is a big celebration. Missouri is one of only a handful of states that still has this big disparity on the books. We have a 17-to-1 disparity, so it's 17 times harsher for possession of crack versus cocaine, even though they are chemically identical. It would increase the lifetime limits on expungements to 2 felonies and 3 misdemeanors, where it stands now as 1 felony and 2 misdemeanors. Obviously, this is just for expungement eligible offenses. So excited that even though Clean Slate did not pass, there's still some momentum on the expungement side of things. But we will still continue to press for an automated process that makes that process accessible for everyone. It would change prosecutorial jurisdiction for a motion to vacate a charge from the county where the person was convicted to the county where the charges were filed. This is notable for places like, say, St. Louis City. There's a high-profile case that gets moved to St. Charles County where it's tried. Years later, the prosecutors, of St. Louis City would like to vacate that charge because it's problematic. There's several cases, such as Christopher Dunn's case, currently being heard that this kind of applies to. So this is something advocates have been fighting for a while. A couple provisions around juveniles in the adult criminal legal system. It would increase the general minimum age of juvenile certification from 12 to 14, and then for a certain list of more serious felonies that currently does not have a minimum certification age whatsoever, it would set that minimum certification age at age 12. Two other provisions around juveniles in the adult system. It would require the Office of State's Courts Administrator to collect and share data on juvenile certification, so everyone has a very clear picture of just how many kids in the adult criminal legal system we are talking about. And then it would require DOC to have treatment and rehabilitation programs, education programs specifically for this population. Since youth in the adult criminal legal system are not actually housed with adults, they oftentimes have no programming offered to them. And so this has been a major gap that we're excited to see addressed. There are a couple not so great provisions in 754. It would limit the provisions of civilian oversight boards to what is expressly defined in state statute. So really trying to hem in the abilities of local accountability boards to oversee police accountability. And then it would add second-degree murder as a carve-out for who is ineligible for parole after serving 15 years for those sentenced under the age of 18. Sorry, I know that's a lot of technical jargon there, but this actually is an improvement on last year's language because it kind of parses apart the second-degree murder charges and certain folks that, would be guilty of, say, a robbery has occurred, someone dies in the commission of that robbery, the individual did not pull the trigger, they were there age 17, say, that is could be a second degree murder charge, that is carved out. That type of incidence is carved out, whereas it was not in last year's language. If you would like a more thorough breakdown on Senate Bill 754 and you are not in the Community Justice Coalition, please shoot me an email. We have a recording from our last meeting where we really dug very deep into this bill, and I'd be happy to share it with you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Gwen. We just have a couple minutes left. I've got a couple final slides to run us through, but if you have any questions on anything that's been covered so far today, do drop those in the chat. I'm sure that our team will be willing to stay a little past 1 to answer any questions that you all have. So do feel free to drop them there. A few other bills that we worked on this session. We've been working with our partners at Missouri Family Health Council for several sessions now to pass legislation that would require health insurance companies to cover a full year's supply of birth control at a time. This bill made it super, super far this year. It just needed one final vote in the Senate that couldn't get done just because of general Senate dysfunction at the end of session. So we'll keep working on that. The second bill here was in a similar boat. This is forcing Medicaid to cover hearing aids, which they do for children, but not for adults. That was also one Senate vote shy of passage. So I'm sure that will be back with a lot of energy next year. One interesting bill that we worked on that we'll be keeping an eye on, currently what we've discovered is that the earning tax in St. Louis has no floor. So for state and federal taxes on income, there is a low threshold of folks who actually are just exempt from paying those taxes because they don't make enough money to be taxed. In St. Louis, that floor doesn't exist. If you make $100 in a year, you owe the city of St. Louis $1. That feels crazy to us, so we're going to keep an eye on policy around that. And then, of course, one of the major victories for many, many organizations, including ours, who worked on this issue this year and in all the recent years, is really around protecting our initiative petition process. There were literally dozens of hours of vetoes, over 100 hours of vetoes on this issue. But at the end of the day, advocates prevailed. Thank you. Big shout out to the Senate Democrats, who held the floor in the Senate for over 50 hours in the last week of session for a record-breaking filibuster to protect our right to put initiatives directly on the ballot. And you will see 4 such initiatives on the ballot this fall. We're currently waiting on signatures to be certified, but I anticipate that all 4 of those things will make the ballot. Super quick session by the numbers. So over 2,500 bills were filed this session. Only 28 bills passed. That does not include the 18 appropriation bills. People usually keep those in a separate category. So I did the math for you. That's 1.1% of all bills that were filed passed. This is a new historic low for the Missouri legislature. At no point have we passed fewer bills than this in a session. We passed more bills than this in 2020 when the building was fully shut down every other week for COVID. They passed 31 bills that year and only 28 this year. So this is a really concerning trend. This is the 5th consecutive year that the Missouri legislature has passed less than 50 bills. So from me to you, I would really encourage you, if you are out at candidate forums, if you are, vetting candidates ahead of our elections this year in August and November, please ask them what they feel about this trend and how they intend to fix it, because it is so clear to us at this point that the legislature is just not doing the work of the people. I'm going to come back to questions because we are right at 1 o'clock. A couple of quick announcements. Please join us next month in St. Louis for our Advocacy Awards Brunch. You can use the QR code right there on your screen to go to a website with more information. I'm sure one of my teammates will also drop that link in the chat for you all. We have some really incredible honorees that we are celebrating this year. So please come and celebrate the work of those folks and all of our collective work in 2024. Quite frankly, despite the fact that only 28 bills were passed, we had a major victory in all 3 of our coalitions, and I am so proud of all 3 of our coalitions for the work that they did on those issues. So please come spend some fellowship time with us, and let's celebrate our collective accomplishments together. You can also save the date for our annual summit, which is going to take place this year on November 12th and 13th in Columbia. Ticket sales will be opening later this summer, but do go ahead and hold those dates and plan to come and be with us. And here are just a bunch of other ways that you can stay connected with Empower Missouri. All of our amazing policy managers talked to you today about joining their coalitions. We would love to come to you and offer advocacy training for your staff, your board members, your community partners. Invite us to do that. You can do that through our organizational membership program or otherwise. And if you weren't listening to our podcast this session, you really missed out. We think we're super funny. We hope that you do too. So all major podcast stations are carrying Under the Dome now. So you can listen to our wrap-up podcast, which went out this week, and backtrack to other ones. We'll also be putting out more infrequent, probably more of a monthly podcast through the summer and fall, but do join us for those as well. And of course, you can always follow us on social media for the latest and greatest. There's all of our channels. Thank you so much for being with us here today. If you do have any questions that you would like to ask our team, like I said, our staff will stay on for a few minutes. Otherwise, have an amazing Friday. Thanks so much for being with us, and enjoy and have a safe holiday weekend. Thanks, everyone.
Mallory,
Yes, sir.
I have a thought.
Great.
The lack of accomplishment in the state legislature this year has been the subject of numerous legislative briefs I get and a number of legislator year-end newsletters, as well as the general media. Would it be appropriate for Empower and allied organizations to issue some kind of a public statement calling on the legislature to start paying attention to the basic needs of Missourians and not inter-party bickering? Excuse me.
I think that's a great idea, Bob. And I think actually it would be a great thing to put that out um, kind of in the lead up to the 2025 session. I think if we do it now, they'll forget that we're watching them. So I actually would love to talk with you and others more about doing something like that in the fall, especially since we do have a number of folks who are terming out or not running again. We'll have a better picture of who actually will be in the legislature next year. But I do think as advocacy organizations, we should call on them to turn the tide on this trend. That's a phenomenal idea. Can I reach out to you this summer to talk more about it?
Yes, ma'am. Listen, I'll try and remember to send you an email. I would just add briefly that actually this would be a really good time to do it. I mean, as a former media person, I can tell you that this is when editors are expecting to get comment while we're still
Mm-hmm.
in the 48-hour news cycle. But
Mm-hmm.
I also agree with you that we have a second opportunity at the start of the next legislature. And so, yeah, we'll try and get with each other. I'm going to bring this up to the silver-haired legislature, and because I think this would be very well received in the media.
Excellent. Thanks, Bob. Any other questions out there?
A quick one. Is there, where do you have details on the conference that are posted somewhere?
Amber, do we have a live conference page on the website yet, or just the save the date?
We have the page, but it does not have registration details, but I'm gonna go ahead and get the link so that you can refer back to it later.
I'd like to at least save the date. I'm right out of Columbia, so it'll be downtown for me.
Fantastic. Oh,
So
yeah,
I just put it in the chat. When the registration is live, it will be on this page.
Thank you very much, and I'll at least save the dates for now. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
awesome. Any other questions? All right, y'all.